In this tutorial, I'll show you how to build amazing Elementor Pro post grids such as this one. When I hover over this, you can see the beautiful animation, and this whole data is dynamic post data. The title, the metadata related to the post, and the link to the post itself. If you click on any of the links, it takes me to the individual post. This is all by using just Elementor Pro Grid Loop Builder custom CSS, and also by using the power of Elementor Flexbox Container. And not just this, you can also build loops such as this one. So this is the loop, and when I hover over this, you can have this. You can build grids, and the possibilities are endless, and you need Elementor Pro version 3.8 or above to achieve this. Now if you don't have Elementor Pro, you can get it from the link in the description. If you have it already, let's begin the tutorial. Now before starting out, head over to your dashboard, click on Elementor, click on settings, and under experiments, make sure that the Flexbox container is turned to active, and also the loop is turned to active as well. So once that is done, don't forget to click on save changes and purge all the cache if you have to. Once you do that, you're good to go. Now we can build our loops. Now let me create a new page from my WordPress dashboard. I'll just click on add new. Let's call it loop 3.8 page. I'll choose the template as Elementor full width. I'll publish this page. Once the page is published, I'll just click on edit with Elementor, and that takes me to the Elementor editor. Now I just need to drag in the loop grid widget. There are two ways to create a loop. You can either do it directly by dragging in the loop grid widget from any page that you're using this, or you can use the theme builder to create this. I already made a tutorial on this. Link to that will be in the description. But again, I'll just click and drag this loop grid here. Now on the left hand side, there is a button to create template. I can either pick an existing template by clicking on this drop down, or I'll just click on create template. I'll click on save, and now we're actually creating the loop for the grid itself. So I'll just maybe drag in featured image, which is the post featured image, and I'll also drag in the post title. You can use the normal widgets or use the dynamic widgets such as post title. Let me change the HTML tag to h3 or something. So this is good. Now I can simply click on save and back on the top hand side. Now we're back in the grid builder, and the grid is instantly built just like that, right? We just built our grid without leaving this page. That's really awesome. Now you can again click on edit template to edit this. You can drag in additional widgets or change the existing ones according to your wish. That's great. That's how you build a loop grid using Elementor Pro 3.8 or above. Now let's get started by tweaking the loop grid that we just built. Of course, you can go to the individual loop item and customize it using Elementor. But what if you want to change the look of the grid itself? Elementor doesn't give much of an options here, other than that you can just pick the source. Maybe you can change the post type from posts to pages to products or anything else. You can just use some basic queries and pagination, that's it. But what if I want to make this post occupy the whole first row, and then I want all the other posts follow that? Well, all this can be done using custom CSS. And before telling you about the custom CSS that we need, you need to understand that this loop grid widget is built based on a CSS framework called Grid. Similar to a Flexbox layout, which the Flexbox container uses. Every Elementor container is basically a Flexbox container now. Similarly, this post grid uses something called CSS Grid framework. Well, how can you check that? If I minimize this side panel and right click on this post grid widget and click on inspect element, when I hover over this, you can see that this whole Elementor loop container is actually a grid, and that is indicated in the Safari browser. And when I hover over this, the other containers are marked as flex, meaning these are built based on the CSS framework called Flexbox. And this whole loop grid is built based on the CSS grid. Well, since it's built based on CSS grid, we can use the grid properties to manipulate this grid. So I'll just click on this loop grid widget, go to advanced, and let's give it a unique name. So I'll just call it DA my-grid. So this is the class name that I'm giving to this grid. I'll use this class name to target this grid. So I'll just click on the settings cog, go to style or go to advanced and paste my custom CSS here. Or you can go to the hamburger menu, click on site settings and paste your custom CSS there. But for the time's sake, we'll just do it at this page level. So I'll just click on the settings cog, go to advanced. I'll first target the class that this grid is in. So it's .da my grid. Alright. Now I want to target individual posts. So I have to find out the class of this loop item. Again, I'll minimize the side panel, right click on this, click on inspect element. Now I'll keep hovering over each of the element until this whole grid is highlighted or the loop item is highlighted, and turns out it's this one. So I'll just click on this arrow that minimizes this whole loop item. So if you monitor closely, this is our whole post grid. Now I've minimized most of the items, and the loop item is basically this second child, or at even number we have all the loop items. The first child is basically a style tag for the first loop item. Then second child is basically the loop item itself. Third child is again style item. Fourth child is loop item. As you can see, when I hover over this, each of the loop items are highlighted, right? When I hover over this, you can see that first loop item is highlighted. So we want to target this first loop item and make it big enough to occupy the whole row, right? So I'll just minimize this, go to my CSS, and the class for that is .e-loop document or e-loop document, and within that I want to use the nth child property to target the first element, because we do not want to target every loop item, we just want to target the first loop item, which is the second child. So if I say 2, that targets the very first item. Now I can simply use something called grid column property, and I can simply say 1 / and -1, and just like that the first grid item or the first loop item takes the whole space and rest all are pushed down, right? It's that simple, just one line of code. Now if I want to do it to the second loop item, just put 4 here. The first one is normally placed, but the second one becomes bigger. If I want to do it for the last one, which happens to be the 12th post or the 12th child, I just need to do 12. All other grid items are normal, but the 12th becomes big. So it's just this property, which is called grid column. You say 1. So start from the first column and go till the end. That's what this means, right? It basically means occupy the whole space, right? So that is cool. You can, since we have targeted the individual loop item, you can also style it using your CSS properties. Maybe you can give it a background, right? Something like that. You can also give it a border radius. Don't worry, all this code will be in the description, so make sure to check that out. And I just gave a random border radius for this first element. Purple is maybe too strong, maybe I'll go with pink. So something like that. You can style just the first item by targeting the first child. Again, if you want to target the second loop item, just put 4 here. Multiply that number with 2. If you want to target the third loop item, just target 6. And you can target each of the loop items individually and put any CSS code, and it's really cool. Now, if I want 2 post loops or 2 post items or 2 loop items in the first row, how do I do that? Well, it's quite simple. You just target the first loop item, which is the second child, and the second loop item, which is the fourth child. Okay, I'll revert the code back to normal where it was. I'll copy this whole code snippet again. I'll paste it for our second loop item, which is this. So instead of 2, I need to put 4. Let me change the background to silver so we can identify both of them. So pink is the first loop item, silver is the second loop item. Alright, border radius, I'll just leave it as is, or you can change it. Now I want this post to take up 3/4 of the space, and remaining 1/4 I want this loop item to take up. How do I do that? Well, just check the number of columns you have in your loop grid. So if I click on the loop grid, go to content, the number of columns are 3. So you need to add 1 to that. So that means 4. So totally you have 4 column lines since you have 3 columns, right? Just take the number of columns, add 1, right? Why am I doing that? You'll understand. So again, I need to click on the settings cog, go to advanced tab, and instead of -1, since we have 4 columns, I just want this to span across 3 columns, right? You can see that since I told you the number was 4, it just has spanned across 3 column lines. That means 1 column line is still empty, and we just do that with this. So we start with third one and we finish with the fourth one, or if you say -1, it's essentially the same. You can see that these both loop items are placed in the first row and you have a hybrid grid. Similarly, you can target other grid items and perform various things with it. So it's just that easy. Just look at the number of columns you have on your desktop. Again, this is for the desktop, and make sure that you have the same number of columns for desktop on tablet as well, right? I think on mobile it will be anyway just 1. Or you need to use custom breakpoints to customize this even further. I have tutorials on custom breakpoints, so make sure you check that out. So that's how you make use of the CSS grid item. Now let's build our own custom loop items using custom CSS that you find on online sources. So I want to show you a couple of creative and amazing loop item designs that I found on CodePen. I'll leave a link to this article, right? There are a ton of them. Just Google CSS card layouts and there are a ton of them. I'll just show you how to do 2 layouts, right? I'll show you this one and how you can apply them to Elementor loop items with ease thanks to custom CSS and the Flexbox container. Now back in my Elementor dashboard, I'll go to theme builder interface. I'll click on loop item. I'll click on add new and I'll click on the settings cog. Call this loop code 1. Alright, I'll simply publish this. Alright, I'll also leave the entire CSS code so you can simply copy and paste in the appropriate place or in this particular loop. Anyway, in order to understand how this loop is built, you need to understand the HTML and CSS. By looking at the HTML, you can see that there's a container within which we have a card, and card has 2 faces. One is face 1 and the second one is face 2, right? So that is the basic HTML structure, and basically the rest is just a repetition. So phase 1 is basically this text and this paragraph. So this can be our title and this can be our post excerpt, and this can be a number. Phase 2 can be a number. I just linked it to post ID, but if you have custom fields, you can just pull that dynamic data and put custom field data as well, right? It's totally dynamic. I told you loop is totally dynamic. So you can see that this class card is basically a grid. If you click on view compiled CSS, if you come down and see the CSS of the card, or basically the container, the whole container is a grid. We don't have to worry about that. So our container is the post grid itself. So we don't have to write any code or copy any code from here. Now let's look at the next piece of code. This is code regarding the card or the card as a whole. So this will be our loop item, right? It gives some basic properties to the card, and then it has some basic properties to face of the card or both faces of the card, right? Again, these are Flexbox containers. That's what is made in here. We don't even need that because we can simply use Flexbox containers instead of writing this whole code. Now the code that we need to copy is from here, which is from phase 1. We need to target everything else, right? So within phase 1, he's also targeting Java, which happens to be this paragraph. We can simply do that using Elementor natively, so we don't need this code. Again, the Python code, the C# code, we don't need these snippets. We need phase 2 code. We need this code as well. We need this one. We need this one. And this basically gives a linear gradient. We can just give a single gradient to all of our loop items because we do not want to target each of the loop item and give them a separate gradient. We are building the loop item itself. Anyway, so basically we have a container within which we need 2 faces. So you can think of 2 faces as 2 inner containers, right? So in here, for the first container, they have 2 elements. So this needs to be another container, and the second container, they just have text. So this can be a simple heading widget, right? You'll understand what I'm doing. So within here, I'll just drag in the post title, or let me drag in the heading widget, which is the phase 2. I'll just click on the dynamic data and link it to post ID. So every post will get its ID displayed in here. So every post has its unique ID and that gets displayed. But if you have any custom field, you can simply click here, choose the custom field and actually pull that data. But for now, I'll just pull in the post ID. So you can have numbers for each of the post loop items, right? Whenever you're publishing a post, you can add a number and you can display that in the post grid. Anyway, I'll just display the post ID for phase 2, and for phase 1, we need a container. So I'll click on the widgets button. I'll search for a container and I'll nest the container within this actual loop container, right? So this is outer container. We need an inner container. Within this, I'll have two elements, which is basically text and some another text or whatever you like, right? So again, I'll just click on the plus button. I'll just drag in the post title into this inner container. You have to hover over this inner container and make sure that it's within this inner container. I'll click on this heading widget. I'll change this from maybe H1 to H3 or something. All right. And we need another text. You can simply drag in post excerpt into this inner container above or below this. I don't have excerpt, so maybe I'll just drag in text editor widget, but you can drag in post excerpt under this inner container. So this inner container becomes our phase 1 and this outer container becomes our phase 2, right? We'll just give a similar class names so that we can simply copy and paste this whole CSS code and we get the same effects, right? I'll just click on this inner container. As you can see in the code, it has two classes. The first phase has two classes, phase and phase 2, or phase and phase 1. So I'll just click on the inner container, go to advanced, and I'll just add a prefix DA, which is the name of my website, DigitalOcean. You can add a similar prefix. I'll call it DA phase, DA-phase, and DA-phase 1, right? Two classes basically separated by spaces. Just give them in here to the inner container. Similarly, our second phase is basically our heading widget. I'll click on the heading widget, go to advanced, and again, the two class names are DA phase space DA-phase 2. All right. So we have our two phases in here. Now it's time to copy and paste the whole code. We don't need the body code. We don't need the container code because our grid container is handled by Elementor. We need to copy the code starting from here till here. So I'll copy this. I'll paste it into a notepad. I'll remove body, and container is basically our card. So we'll give our card a class name. So I'll just click on this loop item, go to this. So since it was card, we'll just call it DA-card, the class name. All right. Now we can simply delete the container and we can replace card by DA-card. Again, I can do the same here. I'll simply replace class names with our class names, DA-phase, since we have similar HTML structure, right? We have H3 here. So card will be replaced DA-phase is DA-phase, phase 1. And I don't think we need these three codes, right? We can do this using Elementor natively. I'll remove this, again .da-card, DA-phase. Basically, I'm replacing their class names with our class names. It's as simple as that. And I'm removing the unnecessary class names. So this is the cleaned up code. I replaced phase 1 with DA-phase 1, phase 2 with DA-phase 2. And if there's H3 in our container, I replaced it with H3. You can also remove this. That'll just work. So again, I need to come back in here. I need to click on the container, go to advanced, and under custom CSS, I need to paste this whole thing. Now we just need to just adjust a little bit of the code. I think if we can adjust the font size, that should be fine. So maybe I'll just remove this to 20 pixels. So that is great. And normal size, I'll just change it to 50 pixels. All right. Now we just need background. We missed the background. I didn't replace this properly, and just like that. See that? I can also change the color of this heading widget. If I change this to white, yes. So just like that, we have our functioning loop. Now if I create a page with this loop using the loop grid, we'll get a design. So let us create a new page. I'll just call it code1 page, right? So I'll click on the settings cog. I'll call it code1 page, and page layout I'll select Elementor full width. I'll publish. I'll drag in the loop grid widget. I just need to type the name of this loop, which is loop code1, right? And just like that, each of the posts. Alright, we just achieved this grid just by porting and understanding how this whole container is made. It's as simple as that. Now you can tweak the heading widget and position it properly at the center. You can do it on your own. It's quite simple. Also, while giving class names, make sure that those class names are unique on that page. Now we slightly missed the style a bit. The first one has yellow color text. You can simply go to the loop item and change it. Just click on this page title, give it a yellow color, right? Something like that. You can also do the same with this piece of text. Again, go here, give it a slight yellowish kind of color, and just like that we achieved that. Now if you reload this page, those changes should also reflect in here. So that is style 1. So just by understanding the HTML structure and mapping it, we have a very fancy loop grid, and this is just stunning. Okay, now moving on to our second grid design, which is this. So we'll build this loop, understand how this loop was built or how this card design was built in the first place. We'll apply it to our Elementor loop and copy and paste the code. Again, you don't have to write the code. The whole of this code will be available in an article linked down below. So check that out. Let's begin designing this loop. Now let us understand the HTML structure of this, and this applies to basically any card design that you find on the internet. Just understand the HTML structure, see how many containers you need for that particular card design, just fit in the containers and copy and paste the CSS code. It's as simple. Okay, now again, this whole thing is a container, and each container has a card, right? And card has two faces, face 1 and face 2, and they also have a common class name called face. Similar to our previous example, the first face has this, which is an image and a heading, right? So you can have a featured image and a title of the post as dynamic data for this card. And the second one is excerpt and a read more button, right? So that is for phase 2. Let's design our basic card loop item. Again, I'll use our theme builder to start creating our loop item. I'll click on loop item, click on add new, and I'll just call this loop item loop code 2. So I'll click on settings cog, call it loop code 2. This is actually very similar to the previous example. Just need to change few settings. Now I'll publish this. By examining this, I understood that we need two containers, because the first container needs to hold an image and the title. The second container needs to hold some text and a button, right? So let's build that. I'll also close this page. Now let's drag in a container. So within this container, again, we need two containers, right? The first inner container, or we can simply duplicate this. All right. So within this whole container, we have two containers, and within first container, we need an image. You can drag in the featured image widget, but I'll just drag in an image and drag in a transparent image. This design seems to work properly with transparent or PNG images or SVG images. So I'll just drag in an SVG or transparent image. You can just drag in your featured image, or you can also pull in custom data by clicking on this and maybe pull a custom field that is transparent in nature, because this design works perfectly good with transparent images or PNG images with transparent background. Anyway, I just dragged in a random image. You can drag in any featured image or whatever you like. And after that, we have title. So I'll drag post title. I'll click on the widgets button, and that has to be in the first container. I'll just click and make sure that it's going inside the first container. I can also verify that by clicking on this container and seeing that this whole thing is within this container. Now we need to fill up the second container with some data, right? Again, this can be dynamic or static. Since I don't have excerpt for my dummy posts, I'll drag text editor just to show you, right? You can also link it dynamically by using fields. All right. Now the second one is basically a button. I'll just drag button widget into the second container. We have the basic structure. Now we need to give class names, right? Since we already gave phase 1 and phase 2, we'll just change the numbers. We'll make this phase 3, we'll make this phase 4, and we'll make this phase 5, right? Just simple naming terminology. And we'll call this card 2, right? I'll just click on the outermost container, go to advanced, and I'll just give it a class name of DA-card2, right? This can be anything. I'm just making sure that this is always unique on my website because I want to paste and I want to copy and paste the custom CSS globally into my theme styles. So that's why I'm doing it. Click on the first container or the first inner container, go to advanced, and let's call it DA phase 4 or phase 3 and DA hyphen phase 4, right? I'll click on the second innermost container, DA hyphen phase 3, which is the common class, space DA hyphen phase 5, which is the class unique to the second container, right? Similar to what we have in this structure. All right. Now you can leave the settings at their default, update this. Now we need to do the same thing. We have to check which code we really need and which code we don't really need, right? We don't need the code for body because Elementor will handle it for us. Container, we don't really need it. It's basically a Flexbox container. We don't need the container. We just need to take care of the code that starts with card. I don't think we even need this. So let's start with this. So I'll copy everything from here and we'll change the class names accordingly. We'll delete the code that we don't really need. Copy into my notepad. Now I copied and pasted the code. We don't need the container class because we have the card class. Again, I'll remove all the instances of container class, and we also need to replace phase class with phase 2 or 3 or 4, whatever we have given just now. Let me clean up the code. So yeah, so this is card 2 and this is phase 3 and this is phase 4. 1 is replaced by 4, 2 is replaced by 5, phase is replaced by phase 3, right? I'll do that for the whole code and copy and paste the same code. We'll see how it works. So after carefully porting the code properly, we still have some issues, but this is the kind of cleaned up code, right? I just replaced it with appropriate class names. There seems to be a problem of these two containers running into each other, right? We can fix that. I'll click on this heading widget. Again, this heading widget is too big, so I'll change it from H1 to H3. So that is great. And let me just click on this outer container, go to layout, and let me change the gap between elements to 0, right? So that way we just have this. I'll clean up and finalize the code again, but we roughly have the code. So we have this, and I'll also click on this outermost container and align items onto the center. I'll update this. Now if we create a new page, I'll just drag in the loop grid widget and select our code 2, and there we have it. All right. I'll slightly tweak this code, but you get the whole idea, right? So this is how you take a code on CodePen or customize the Elementor loop grids and build your own, right? There are tons of examples, and if you can map them properly, you can do all sorts of designs like this. And if you want to learn CSS like this, I made a separate course on Udemy. You can check it out and learn more about Elementor in detail, right? There is an Udemy course on this. And if you want to learn more about the container or custom CSS basics, you can check out Elementor Basics playlist on this channel. And I'll see you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments how you felt about this tutorial. Bye bye.